My name is Clara Vance. For the 28 years I've been on this earth, that name has meant different things to different people. To the board of Vance Meridian, it means a silent, controlling share, a seat at a table I've never been permitted to occupy myself. To my father, it means a responsibility, a delicate asset to be managed with the same cool precision he applies to his stock portfolio. To the world, it is a name synonymous with old money and quiet tragedy, the kind that gets whispered about at charity galas. To me, it feels like a beautiful, heavy cloak I never learned how to take off. My personal background is a story told in whispers and medical reports. A reckless driver, a rainy night on a coastal highway, and a life cleaved in two. Before the accident, I was a student of botany, a girl who loved the smell of damp earth and the intricate patterns on a fern frond. After, I became a patient, a passenger, a permanent resident of a life curated for me by others. My legs, though they can bear my weight for short, painful distances, are unreliable collaborators. A web of nerve damage runs up my spine, a constant, humming reminder of my body's betrayal. Most days, I use a wheelchair. It is elegant, of course, carbon fiber and polished chrome, as sleek and unobtrusive as my father could commission. It is, like everything else in my life, designed to be looked at, but not to draw too much unfortunate attention. Today, I am parked. That's the only word for it. I sit in the hushed and sterile quiet of the Summit Lounge at Port Blossom International Airport, a ghost in a machine. The lounge is a symphony of muted tones, dove gray, cream, and the soft gleam of brushed nickel. The air smells of expensive leather and nothing else, an artificial peace. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city I call home is shrouded in its signature mist, a soft, melancholic blanket that blurs the edges of the world. A private jet, my jet, waits patiently on the tarmac, its engines a-low, dormant hum. It is scheduled to take me to a pristine wellness clinic in the Swiss Alps, a place of silent nurses and nutrient-rich broths. My father calls it a restorative necessity. I call it a beautiful prison, just like the one I am leaving. My hand trembles as I reach for my teacup. It's a familiar tremor, a frustrating misfire in the wiring between my brain and my fingertips. The fine-boned china rattles against its saucer, a tiny, discordant note in the lounge's placid harmony. No one looks up. My assistant, Ms. Albright, is somewhere confirming our flight path, her presence a crisp, starched shadow even in her absence. Around me, other travelers murmur into their phones, their voices low and important. They are ships passing in the day, and I am a lighthouse whose lamp has gone out. I feel profoundly visible and yet completely unseen. A portrait hanging on a wall that everyone has grown too accustomed to notice. I hate it. I hate the way my helplessness is a public spectacle, and the way my privilege renders that spectacle invisible to those who might otherwise care. Across the lounge, in a less coveted area near the staff entrance, sits a man and a little girl. They do not belong here. Their presence is a splash of warm, vibrant color in a monochromatic world. The man wears a flannel shirt, its sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with what looks like sawdust. His face is kind, etched with the faint lines of someone who smiles easily but also worries deeply. The quiet fatigue around his eyes is not of boardrooms, but of honest labor and a long day. He kneels beside his daughter, his large, gentle hands adjusting the strap on a small, brightly colored backpack. The little girl, who can't be more than 7 or 8, leans into him and whispers something, her pigtails bouncing. Her gaze flickers over to me. Then the man looks up. Our eyes meet for a fraction of a second across the expanse of polished marble. I immediately look down, my cheeks flushing with heat. Being seen is one thing, being noticed is another entirely. I feel a familiar coil of dread in my stomach. Pity is a suffocating blanket, and I have been smothered by it for years. But he doesn't look at me with pity. His expression is one of quiet observation, of simple awareness. He sees the teacup, the tremor, the solitude. He sees the space around me, empty of family or staff. He stands, brushing his hands on his worn jeans, and says something to his daughter. She nods and pulls a sketchbook from her backpack, immediately absorbed. Then he starts walking towards me. Not with the brisk purpose of an assistant or the hesitant shuffle of someone unsure. He moves with a slow, deliberate grace, his work boots making soft, solid sounds on the floor. He is not a rescuer rushing to the scene. He is just a man, crossing a room, a human being noticing another. My heart hammers against my ribs. I brace myself for the inevitable, clumsy offer of help. The slightly too loud voice people use when they're not sure if you're fragile or just deaf. He stops a respectful distance from my chair. He doesn't look down at it, at the wheels or the frame. He looks at my face. "The quiet in these places is louder than the noise, isn't it?" he asks. His voice is warm, a low baritone like the resonant hum of a cello. I am so startled by the unexpected poetry of the question that I can only blink. He gestures to the empty chair beside me. "Would you mind some company? My daughter and I have a long wait ahead of us, and she's already critiqued my drawing skills." There is no artifice in his smile, no hidden agenda in his eyes. Just a simple, human invitation. My own voice, when it finally emerges, is rusty from disuse. "No," I manage to say, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "I wouldn't mind." He pulls the chair over and sits, leaving a comfortable space between us. He doesn't speak again right away. He just shares the silence with me. And for the first time all day, the silence doesn't feel like a void. It feels like a space being held open, waiting for me. I take a slow, deep breath, and the scent of rain and wet earth from his flannel shirt cuts through the sterile air of the lounge. It smells, faintly, of life. The silence that settled between us wasn't empty. It was restful. It was the kind of quiet that exists between two people who understand that words are not always necessary for communication. He didn't push, didn't pry. He simply sat, his presence a steady, grounding anchor in the sterile sea of the lounge. Across the room, his daughter was completely absorbed, a pink crayon clutched in her fist, her brow furrowed in concentration. I finally managed to lift my teacup with both hands, the warmth of the porcelain a small comfort. "You're a long way from the commercial terminals," I said, my voice still a little thin. It was a statement, not a question. He gave a small, wry smile. "Our flight to visit my mother got canceled. Engine trouble. They were kind enough to move us in here while we wait for standby." I think the woman at the desk felt sorry for Maya. He nodded toward his daughter. "That's her name. She has a way of making people want to give her things. Usually cookies. But an exclusive lounge is a new one." A genuine smile touched my lips. It felt like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in years. "She seems very focused." "She's an artist," he said, his tone rich with a father's gentle pride. "Sees the world in shapes and colors I miss." "My name is Leo, by the way." "Leo Thorne." "Clara Vance," I replied. I watched him, waiting for the flicker of recognition, the subtle shift that always came when people connected the name to the fortune, to the story. It never came. He just nodded, as if I'd given him the most ordinary name in the world. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Clara," he said, and I believed him. He extended his hand. It was large and calloused, with faint stains of wood polish ingrained in the knuckles. I hesitated for only a moment before placing my hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, his skin warm against my own, which always seemed to be cold. It was a handshake that felt real solid. "People don't usually approach me," I admitted, my gaze drifting to the mist-slicked window. "My father ensures I'm always managed." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "They talk to my assistant or my nurse. Not to me." "Well," Leo said softly, withdrawing his hand. "I'm not talking to your assistant. I'm talking to you." He followed my gaze to my hands, which were now resting in my lap. "I saw you were having a bit of a fight with that teacup." I get a tremor in my own hands sometimes, after a long day sanding. My head snapped back toward him, my defensiveness rising like a shield. I was so used to having to explain, to justify my body's failings. "It's a neurological condition. From an accident." "You don't owe me an explanation," he said, his voice so gentle it disarmed me completely. "A shaky hand is just a shaky hand." Doesn't say a thing about the person it's attached to. I stared at him, truly stared. In my world, my condition was the first and last thing anyone saw. It was a footnote on my life, a defining characteristic. To have it seen, acknowledged, and then so gently set aside was a new and dizzying experience. The tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen, ever so slightly. Just then, Maya stood up and trotted over to us, her sketchbook held against her chest like a secret. She stopped in front of my chair, looking at me with wide, curious brown eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice a clear little bell. "I made this for the lady." She shyly held out the sketchbook. Leo smiled. "Go on, show her." Maya opened the book and turned it around for me to see. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a literal portrait. It was a garden, drawn in the wonderfully abstract and emotive way of a child. On one side of the page, behind a tall, gray brick wall, was a single, beautiful flower, its petals drooping slightly. On the other side of the wall, where the sun was shining, were two stick figures, a large one and a small one. And the small one was holding a giant, golden key, about to put it into a lock on a little gate in the wall. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden. I was the flower, walled off, alone, wilting. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision. I swallowed, my voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Maya beamed, a radiant, gap-toothed smile. "That's you," she said, pointing a small, crayon-stained finger at the flower. "You looked sad. But there's a gate. You just need the key." I looked from the drawing to Leo, my carefully constructed composure completely undone. He was watching me with an expression of such profound understanding that it felt like he could see right through my skin and into the lonely, frightened heart of me. This man and his daughter, two strangers, had seen me more clearly in 10 minutes than my own family had in 10 years. I reached out a trembling hand and gently touched the page. "Thank you, Maya," I whispered. I think I've been looking for that key for a very long time." Maya, apparently satisfied with her work, climbed into her father's lap and curled against his chest, her mission complete. I couldn't stop looking at the drawing. A simple page in a child's sketchbook felt more valuable than any asset Vance Meridian owned. It was a gift, given freely, with no expectation of return. It was a map. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that I might one day find my way out of the garden. Hours drifted by, marked only by the shifting light as the afternoon began to fade into a soft, gray evening. The rain had picked up, drumming a gentle, meditative rhythm against the vast panes of glass. I kept Maya's sketchbook open on my lap, my fingers tracing the waxy crayon lines of the wall, the gate, the golden key. It felt like a sacred text. Leo and I fell into an easy rhythm of conversation. He told me about his work as a luthier, a restorer of old violins and cellos. He spoke of wood as if it were a living thing, with its own memory and soul. "People bring me instruments that are cracked, broken, silenced," he explained, his voice low as Maya dozed against his shoulder. "They think it's ruined. But the music is still in there. You just have to be patient. You have to listen to what the wood wants, not force it to be something it's not. You have to find the grain, work with it, respect its history." "You make it sound like you're healing them," I murmured, captivated. "I guess I am, in a way." He mused. "But I think the instruments heal me right back. It's quiet work. Honest. Nothing is hidden." His words resonated in the deepest part of me. My entire life was about hiding the cracks, lacquering over the imperfections, pretending to be whole. My father's approach to my recovery had been the opposite of Leo's philosophy. He wanted to force me back into a shape that no longer fit, ignoring the new grain of my life. My father believes in replacement, not restoration. I found myself saying, the words spilling out before I could stop them. When my body was broken, he hired the best doctors to fix it. When that didn't work to his satisfaction, he bought the best equipment to manage it. Everything is about maintaining the image of perfection. The Vance Meridian brand is built on flawless silk, you see. No snags, no imperfections. I'm expected to be the same. Leo listened, his gaze never wavering. He didn't offer empty reassurances or platitudes. He just listened, creating a safe space for my truth. "That sounds like a heavy weight to carry," he said finally. "It is," I whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just a porcelain doll he keeps on a very high shelf. Polished and perfect, but if I were to fall, I didn't need to finish the sentence." Just then, a crisp, efficient presence cut through our quiet bubble. "Miss Vance." I looked up to see Ms. Albright, my father's executive assistant, standing before us. She was impeccably dressed in a gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She held a tablet in her hand, her expression one of polite impatience. She glanced at Leo and the sleeping child in his lap with a flicker of disdain before her gaze settled on me. "The crew has completed their final checks. We are cleared for departure to Geneva. It's time to board." The words landed like stones in the quiet pool of our conversation. Geneva. The clinic. The silent halls and the managed, sterile existence that awaited me. My entire body tensed. The familiar dread returned, cold and suffocating. This was it. The moment was over. The bubble was about to burst. I looked at Leo, a silent plea in my eyes. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave this small island of warmth and authenticity and return to my gilded cage. Leo seemed to understand everything I couldn't say. He gently shifted Maya so he could stand, his movement slow and deliberate. He wasn't abandoning me, he was preparing to stand with me. "Of course," I said to Ms. Albright, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt. Years of practice had taught me how to maintain a calm facade. I gripped the wheels of my chair, my knuckles white. The thought of propelling myself, of moving toward that jet, felt like a betrayal of the fragile hope that had just begun to bloom. Ms. Albright nodded, satisfied. "I will inform the pilot. I'll meet you at the gate." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, final rhythm on the marble floor. I sat there for a long moment, the silence now charged with the imminent departure. The jet on the tarmac no longer looked like a vessel of escape, it looked like a cage with wings. I turned to Leo, my mask of composure cracking. "I don't want to go." The confession was a barely audible whisper, but it felt like a shout in the quiet lounge. He looked down at me, his expression soft. "Then don't." It was so simple, so direct. As if it were actually an option. In my world, it wasn't. My life was a series of appointments and obligations, all scheduled by someone else. But hearing him say it, just for a second, made it feel possible. I took a shaky breath, a wild, rebellious idea taking root. Will you walk with me? To the gate?" It was a small request, but it was a choice. My choice. I wasn't asking him to save me. I was just asking him not to let me go alone. A slow smile spread across Leo's face. He gently woke Maya, who blinked up at him sleepily. "Of course, Clara," he said, his voice a warm reassurance. "We'll walk with you." And so I began to move. I pushed the wheels of my chair myself. Each rotation was an effort, a strain on my weakened arms and a protest from the nerves in my back. But it was my effort, my movement. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was the one deciding the direction. Leo walked silently beside me, a steady, comforting presence, while Maya trailed a few steps behind, her sketchbook clutched in her arms. We were a strange, small procession, moving slowly toward a future I was no longer sure I wanted. The walk to the private boarding gate felt like a journey across a vast, empty desert. The corridor was lined with imposing, abstract art and lit with cold, recessed lighting. Every push of my wheels echoed, a lonely sound in the cavernous space. Through the windows, my jet loomed, a sleek, silver predator waiting to swallow me whole. The boarding ramp was down, a tongue lolling out, beckoning me into the belly of the beast. Miss Albright stood at the gate, a sentinel in her gray suit, tablet in hand. She looked at her watch, a minute, disapproving frown creasing her brow. She saw Leo and Maya with me, and her frown deepened. They did not fit into the clean, orderly picture of my departure. We stopped a few feet from her. The air was thick with unspoken things. I could feel the pull of my old life, the immense, Gravitational force of my father's expectations. It was a current I had been swept along in for so long, I had forgotten how to swim against it. Miss Vance, we are on a very tight schedule, Ms. Albright said, her voice clipped. The clinic in Geneva is expecting you. I looked from her impassive face to the open door of the jet. Then I looked at Leo. He wasn't looking at the jet or the assistant. He was looking at me, his expression open and patient. He was waiting to see what I would do. In his eyes, I saw not an expectation, but a possibility. The possibility of choice. Maya, sensing the tension, stepped forward and slipped her small hand into mine. Her skin was warm and slightly sticky. It was an anchor in the swirling storm of my thoughts. I squeezed her hand gently, drawing strength from the simple, trusting contact. My phone buzzed in my bag. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew who it was. The timing was too perfect. It was my father, calling to ensure his asset was in transit. Ms. Albright's eyes flickered toward my bag, a silent command to answer it, to report in. For my entire adult life, that sound had triggered an immediate, Pavlovian response. Answer, reassure, comply. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The tremor in my hands returned with a vengeance. The path of least resistance was so clear: board the plane, fly to Geneva, sink back into the comfortable numbness of my managed life. It would be easy. It would be painless. And it would be a kind of death. I looked at Maya's drawing, still open on my lap. The walled garden. The golden key. I thought of Leo's words about the broken instruments, about respecting the grain, not forcing it. My life had a new grain. It was time I started to respect it. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Ms. Albright gave a curt nod of approval. Leo's expression remained unchanged, a quiet observer to my internal war. I answered the call. Clara. My father's voice came through the speaker, crisp and devoid of warmth. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. Albright informed me you were delayed. Are you on board now? I looked out the window at the misty Port Blossom sky. I looked at the little girl whose hand was still in mine. I looked at the kind-faced man who saw me. Not my disability or my bank account. No, father, I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. It was clearer and steadier than it had been in years. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean, no? The flight plan is filed. The clinic is waiting. Get on the plane. It wasn't a request. I'm not getting on the plane, I said, a little louder this time. The words felt like stones I was laying, building a new foundation right here on this cold marble floor. Ms. Albright's jaw went slack. She stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. Don't be ridiculous, Clara. My father's voice sharpened, laced with impatience. This isn't a negotiation. You're not well. You need your treatments. You will do as you're told. The old Clara would have folded. The old Clara would have apologized and acquiesced. But the old Clara was a flower in a walled garden, and someone had just handed her a key. You're right, I said, and for a moment, I could hear the relief in his silence. I'm not well. But it's not the clinic I need. I need time. I need to breathe air that isn't recycled and managed for me. I took another breath, this one deeper, fuller. I'm staying in Port Blossom for a while. You are doing no such thing. The command cracked like a whip. I forbid it. Albright, put her on that plane. Ms. Albright took a step forward, her hand reaching instinctively for my chair. Leo shifted his weight, a subtle, protective movement that placed him slightly between us. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a shield. No, I said, looking directly at my father's assistant. Then, into the phone, I spoke my final words. I am an adult, father. And I am a partner in this company. You may have forgotten that, but I haven't. I will call you when I am ready. Goodbye. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I dropped the phone back into my bag. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the loudest, most beautiful silence I had ever heard. I was shaking from head to toe, a volatile mix of terror and exhilarating, triumphant freedom. Ms. Albright stood frozen, her authority completely dismantled. I turned my chair, a small, deliberate movement, and faced Leo. The look in his eyes was not one of pity or even surprise. It was a quiet, shining pride. I let out a shaky laugh, which turned into a sob, which turned back into a laugh. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were a cleansing rain. "What now?" I whispered. I looked at Maya. She was beaming at me, her drawing held up like a trophy. On the back of the page, she had drawn something new. It was a picture of the flower no longer in the garden, but planted under an open, sunny sky. The engine roar of the private jet suddenly intensified, a sound of departure. I turned to watch as the ground crew removed the ramp. The cabin door swung shut with a dull, final thud. My gilded cage was leaving without me, and as it began to taxi away, disappearing into the mist, I felt no regret. Only a profound and overwhelming sense of relief. I had not been left behind. I had been set free. The sterile air of the airport seemed to crack open as we stepped outside. The automatic doors slid apart, and the real world rushed in to meet us, the damp, salty scent of the Port Blossom coast, the muted symphony of city traffic. The cool mist that clung to my skin and hair like a baptism. It felt more real, more alive, than anything I had experienced in years. I tilted my face up, letting the fine drizzle land on my cheeks, mingling with the last of my tears. It was the scent of home, but a home I was about to discover for the first time. Leo pushed my chair, but not in the way Ms. Albright or my nurses ever had. They had always steered me as if I were a piece of cargo, their movements efficient and impersonal. Leo walked with me, his touch on the handles light and companionable, as if we were simply two friends out for a stroll. Maya skipped ahead, her bright backpack a beacon in the gray twilight, occasionally looking back to make sure we were still following. "There's a little place a few blocks from here," Leo said, his voice a comfortable rumble beside me. "It's not fancy. The floors are a bit crooked and the coffee is strong enough to stand a spoon in. But the woman who runs it makes these incredible almond croissants." "It sounds perfect," I said, and I meant it. The thought of a place with crooked floors felt like a rebellion. My entire life had been spent on polished, perfectly level surfaces. I was ready for a little uneven ground. We moved along the pavement, an unlikely trio. A luthier, his artist daughter, and a runaway heiress. People bustled past us, wrapped in coats and their own concerns, and for the first time, I didn't feel their glances as judgments. I was just another person out in the city, part of the flow. The anonymity was liberating. "Are you scared?" Leo asked after a few moments of comfortable silence. I considered the question. The adrenaline from the phone call was beginning to subside, leaving a strange calm in its wake. There was a tremor of fear, a deep uncertainty about the future. My father was not a man to be trifled with. There would be consequences, frozen accounts, angry letters from lawyers. A campaign of emotional warfare. I knew it was all coming. "Yes," I admitted. "I'm terrified." I looked over at him, meeting his steady gaze. "But I think I've been more scared of staying the same." He nodded, a look of deep understanding on his face. The most beautiful instruments are the ones that have been played. They have scars, repairs, signs of a life lived. That's where their character comes from. It's much better than being kept pristine in a glass case. His words were a balm to my raw nerves. He saw the cracks in me not as flaws, but as the beginning of character. We arrived at the cafe. It was exactly as he'd described it, a small, cozy space with mismatched wooden tables. The warm smell of coffee and baked goods wrapping around us like a hug. The floors did, indeed, slope gently toward the back. Maya immediately claimed a table by the window, pulling out her sketchbook. Leo went to the counter, and I wheeled myself over to the table, the simple act of choosing my own seat feeling momentous. Through the window, the city lights were beginning to blur in the rain-streaked glass, creating soft halos of color. It was beautiful. Not a curated, perfect beauty, but a messy, living, breathing one. Leo returned with 2 steaming mugs and a plate with 3 almond croissants. He placed a mug in front of me, his hand brushing mine for a moment. "Welcome to your first day," he said softly. I wrapped my cold hands around the warm ceramic. The coffee smelled rich and dark. I took a sip. It was strong and slightly bitter and absolutely wonderful. "So," Leo said, leaning back in his chair, which creaked companionably. "What's next, Clara Vance?" I looked out the window, at the rain, at the lights, at the endless possibilities of the night. I had no plan. No itinerary. No assistant to tell me where to go or what to do. My bank accounts might be frozen by morning. My father might send an army to retrieve me. I had traded a life of absolute certainty for one of absolute unknown. And I had never felt so calm. "I don't know," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. It reached my eyes, crinkling the corners. "I have no idea." I tore a piece from my croissant. It was flaky, buttery, and sweet. I thought about my schedule at the Swiss clinic, the 6 a.m. wheatgrass shot, the 8 a.m. guided meditation, the 10 a.m. hydrotherapy. It was a life without croissants. "Maybe," I said, thinking of Leo's work, of old wood and hidden music. "Maybe I'll look into botany classes again." There's an arboretum just outside the city, I remember. Full of old, rare trees. "That sounds like a good place to start," Leo said, his eyes smiling back at me. Maya looked up from her drawing. On the page was a new picture. It was the three of us in a warm, glowing cafe. Outside the window, the rain was falling, but inside, we were bathed in light. And in the drawing, for the first time, I wasn't in my chair. I was just sitting at the table, whole and present, a coffee cup steady in my hands. I didn't know where the path would lead. I didn't know if this fragile connection with Leo and Maya was just a moment in time or the beginning of a new chapter. I didn't know how I would rebuild a life from the ground up. But as I sat there, in that imperfect cafe, with the smell of rain and coffee in the air, I knew one thing for certain. The key Maya had drawn hadn't just unlocked a gate. It had unlocked me. And for the first time, I was ready to step through it and see what lay on the other side.